Welcome everyone tonight to our webinar. We have an exciting lineup of great panelists tonight, and we're gathered tonight to talk about when public schools reopen and how we can make our schools stronger and make it effective. So I'm Yvonne Brannon. I am Chair of Public Schools First NC. I'm a former social worker, and currently I am a research director. And joining me tonight moderating and helping me out is Dr. Terrence Ruth. Terrence, say hello. And Terrence is a professor in social work at NC State. He's also a colleague with me at Public Schools First. And so we're really excited to be here. So I wanted to just take a few seconds to introduce and tell you a little bit about our panelists, because they're all fabulous and modest. So I will have a chance to tell you a little bit about them. Now, you're going to see missing is Mark Jewell, and we hope that he'll figure out how to join us in a little while. But everyone knows Mark Jewell. He is a 32-year veteran public school teacher, mostly at the elementary level. He is the current president of NCAE, where he has done a fabulous job, and he is getting ready to end his term at the end of June, and he'll be working with the national organization for NEA, National Education Association. So we're really excited about that. We also have with us tonight another wonderful member of NCAE, but Tamika Walker-Kelly, and she is an elementary music specialist in Federal, North Carolina. But most exciting is that she is the new president-elect of NCAE. We could not have this conversation, right, about what's going on in our schools and how we should open them without having teachers. So we've really thought our first beginning tonight, we would make sure that we were kind of loaded up on the teacher side. And we have Kristin with us tonight. She's a 16-year veteran teacher who teaches kindergarten and reading, and she's currently the president of the Wake NCAE, and she's on the board of directors in North Carolina. So to balance out all our teachers, we have the wonderful Bettina Umstead, who is also a graduate of public schools, including the School of Education at UNC Chapel Hill. She lives in Durham. She has worked her entire adult career has been focused on advocating for educational equity. She was appointed to the school board in Durham in 2016 and then elected in 2018, and she currently serves as the vice chair. So we're really excited to have what I think is a really balanced conversation tonight. I would also add that Terrence has his roots in education as well. He was a teacher in public schools. He's been a principal. So he's had, and now he is a parent of a child in kindergarten. So he brings kind of a parent perspective as well as professional. So I think we're in a great shape tonight to really start our first conversation as we see the governor starting to loosen up and looking at phase one, phase two. The conversations now have been turning to what are we going to do when we open up our public schools. What are the things you're going to be thinking about? But Terrence and I are going to do two things. We're going to have a couple of seed questions, but we want this to be an easygoing conversation. And you can jump off topic or you can jump ahead if you want, because we're really just talking with people who care deeply about our babies and how we educate them. And so we want to make sure that we don't restrict the conversation at all. And if we want to save some time at the end, if you guys are okay with this, to have some questions from our attendees. And so Elizabeth is here with me tonight from Public Schools First, our social media director, and she's going to keep an eye out with me and Terrence on questions that are coming in the chat box so we can see if we can summarize these at the end. So to get started, tonight, we would like to kind of give you an opportunity to kind of react to what's going on right now. I know we want to really talk about we see happening over the summer and the fall, but what have we learned so far? What are some things that are going on that you're observing from your position in public education, some successes, some challenges, and just kind of how are you guys doing? You're out there on the front lines. So we'll start with anyone who wants to jump in here. Tamika is new president-elect. Maybe I should pick on you.
That is perfectly fine. So first of all, Yvonne and everybody who is here at our Public School First NC family, thank you so much for giving me the opportunity to be on the call with y'all tonight, and particularly about this topic because we know it's super important, particularly right now, as we are talking about how do we move forward, right, with public schools. So as an educator, and particularly one that's not a classroom educator, but I'm a specialist, the reactions to remote learning have been vast and varied, I would say, across the spectrum of educators. You have seen, first of all, you have seen the creativeness of educators spring forth in this moment. You have seen the resiliency of teachers who have had to make literally 24-hour decision turnarounds of their entire teaching styles and practices to make sure that they are adapting to the immediate needs of our students all across the state. And so you've seen veteran educators take up learning new technology tools in order to deliver instruction. You've seen a lot of educators collaborate and come together naturally in spaces across Facebook, on Twitter, building new PLCs in order to support each other during this process. You've seen some really beautiful things come out of the communities that schools create between parents and students and educators. And so while we also have seen sort of but you've seen the clear exposure of inequities also of the learning situations from our different student populations, and even our educators who are also sort of balancing their roles of providing for students and also having the struggle of trying to provide for themselves to be able to teach in this new virtual learning environment. So it has been, like I said, vast varied, but you've really seen the teaching profession as a whole, from our classified, our essential support professionals, to our classroom teachers and everybody else, come to step up and rise to the challenge to make sure our students still get a high quality public education in light of this pandemic.
Well, let's take a second here to invite Mark, Jewell. Yay, Mark. We're so glad you're here. We've already given you a standing ovation, so we can skip over that. When we introduced you earlier. You want it again? Okay, everybody clap for Mark.
Actually, it has me as Terrence up there. Is my...
Well, that's okay.
There's two Terrences.
Never be too many Terrences.
I always, hey.
Okay, so we're not quite sure how that happened, but we were just discussing, and Mark, you can listen in and catch it at the end, just kind of talking, letting everybody have a chance to talk a little bit about how things have been going so far with this remote stuff before we jump into what we want to see happen next year. And so, Bettina, you're sitting on a school board. How's the view from there in terms of what's going on so far?
I'm hearing a lot of similar things to what Tamika already said. I think there's so many questions right now and so many different needs across the whole district, right? So you have elementary school, remote learning is going to look very different than high school. A career and technical education class that is culinary and used to being in the classroom is going to look really different. And how does that look? I think all of this has reminded us of the importance of human interaction and connection. I've heard so many stories of students getting on and seeing their teachers and being like, oh my gosh, like I saw my friends, I saw my teachers today, and how important that kind of community that's being built amongst our teachers and students, along with instruction, is also just as valuable to the classroom. So I think that is one of the things that we're learning. And I think one of the biggest challenges is continuing this remote learning continue to exacerbate some of the inequities that were already in our system. We here in Durham did some mail packets. So we sent things in the post office mail, but also there's online things to try to help bridge some of that divide. But I can only imagine. I know students that are still going to work right now and they're trying to learn at the same time, right? And parents who are going to work and trying to learn at the same time. So I think all of that is present as we're trying to respond to this crisis.
Okay. Kristin? We're not hearing you, Kristin.
Is that better?
Yes.
Okay. We have folks who've been at home for 2 months who are, trying to balance out knowing that the best instruction, the instruction that our kids deserve to have, is face-to-face instruction from a live instructor, right? From a live teacher, a live instructional assistant, live counselor, and at the same time knowing that that's not possible right now, are really struggling with balancing out, like, well, we have to provide something for our kids who are able to connect with us, and knowing that what we're doing right now is completely inequitable, and that we're missing chunks of our student population, with both instruction and, just the social interaction of seeing our school community during a morning meeting, or talking on the phone with some of our students. And so that, I think that people are really struggling with the emotional side of that, knowing that what you're doing is not good enough, but that you actually have no way of doing anything better. You have no way of solving that problem. And then you throw in the different layers that people are experiencing, like having their own kids at home that they're trying to help guide them through the remote learning. If they have a kindergartner, they're sitting there side by side with them, trying to help them with their learning. And all of those different layers, how elderly parents you might be caring for, or multiple folks in your house trying to use the internet at the same time. Those challenges, people are really feeling them. And so there are definitely some highlights that come out, and some moments where we're like, oh, this is working for this child. They've never been able to shine like they're shining now because they are able to do some things independently. But for the vast majority of our students and our staff, there are just so many layers of challenges that the folks are really feeling kind of heavy. And the more time goes on, I think that what Bettina, I think what you had said about the social interaction or human interaction piece, that really comes into play more, because then you're dealing with challenges and not having your support system there to help you problem solve through it. So folks are ready to have this conversation about what is it that our students, and what do we need in order to get back into a building, because there certainly is nobody who is excited about staying at home any longer. So I'm really thankful that Public School First NC is having these conversations and playing these webinars.
Into that, Mark, I wonder if you wanted to just throw anything else out there, because you're working with teachers all across the state right now, from very small school systems to large ones like Wake. Anything you want to say in general about kind of like what's going on right now?
Yes, I think first of all, I salute Public Schools First for holding this this webinar and this panel discussion, and all these great educator leaders here, elected school board members. I think during a week of National Teacher Appreciation Week, and by that we say we celebrate and honor all of our public school employees, from the classroom teacher to those amazing frontline workers that are supplying the nutrition and support there. I mean, think about that essential worker, right? That we say that they are essential, but they're also our lowest pay, right? So all of the people in our school community that have stepped up to fill the gaps, as we often have through society, that has failed our public school children. And I think, historically, we've always known that public education was the cornerstone of democracy, and now it has underscored that public schools are the bedrock of the community. And I couldn't be prouder of our educators out there, like on this panel, that are rising up and working harder and longer than they ever have before, just because we know it is the right thing to do for our kids. And I think we've heard time and time again that we know that distance learning is supplemental and nothing replaces that face-to-face learning. We all want to get back to our kids and to our schools, but we know we cannot do that before it is safe and healthy, and the medical professionals tell it is safe to do so. And when people ask me about what is reentry going to look like, I tell them, I said, educators and parents and community members must be on every task force so that their voices are heard when we do get back into a learning environment, what that must be. And another thing that we're also going to need, and that is resources. As you all know, Congress is back in session this week, and we are going to be asking our North Carolinians to make a big push with their delegation, particularly this legislation is starting in the House first, of our NEA ask of $175 billion just for education funding. That's not the big picture of what's going to go into what governors looking for or local counties, but this is just for educational needs, for resources for our kids, for health equipment for our schools when they do reopen, for positions that we know that we're going to need. And that funding is going to be essential. So we're going to be reaching out to you, Yvonne, and to Public Schools First, and to our educators with a week of action coming, I believe, the week of the 14th. And we believe the House may vote on this in the week of the 18th, and then it will go to the Senate. But we've got to mobilize and organize virtually. And we're going to be doing that through webinars, through NEA actions, through text messaging that I can provide to you before we get off the line tonight. But that is going to be critical. What we just got, this $1.6 billion that we just received from the General Assembly, which was about $250 million for school funding, that is just to get us through, right, to the rest of this year. That's providing foods through the summertime, that's remote learning devices, that's stabilizing positions. But we know that there's going to be a huge revenue shortfall, and Congress has got to step up to the plate to make sure that public education does not bear the brunt. We can't take cuts like we did in the recession of 2010. And we must make sure that our legislators invest in this in Congress.
We can't hear you, Terrence. Okay, so, we've moved to the next slide while Terrence is working on that. And Mark, you kind of jumped right in. And so we really want to go round robin now after, with the rest of you, to thinking what Mark talked about with money, and we know it that. But the rest of you share what's really on your heart. What is kind of the top must do? What do we must do before we can open school? Some things that really you think are critical when you think of your own children, your own school, the whole state, when you think of your position. What are some of the must do's? Anybody, just jump in whenever you want. Bettina, you want to start?
Sure, I can. When I think about the must-dos, I think about our most vulnerable students, and I also think about staff members when it comes to this too. So how do we create schools that are protecting people's health? So whether that be for students who have medical needs or adults who also have medical needs. I think they said over half of the adults in North Carolina could be potential high-risk patients, right? And so how do we make sure that we're setting up spaces that address those needs, that people can come to work and go to work, but also not be threatening their health? And then I think also with my policy educator lens on as a school board member, we need to have policies around attendance and pay, and make sure we have protection, we have the funds that we need to be able to operate school really well. If someone is sick, they need to be able to have sick leave and be able to be paid for that time, and their job should not be in jeopardy. So I think we need the logistical spaces of schools to be correct, but we also need to make sure for our policymakers that we have what is necessary for the schools to operate.
Bettina, a quick follow-up for you. In terms of attendance, how much leeway does a local school district have on that? Because I could imagine there are going to be sick kids who are not going to take a chance to come into school when they're sick for other reasons, including COVID-19. What kind of flexibility do y'all have about that? Is that something we have to be talking to the General Assembly about?
Yeah, we do. There's not a lot of flexibility in the local policies because there's some things that are dictated to us around attendance. I think we could get I think we might be able to get creative about what attendance counts as. So if you are sick but you check in and do your remote learning, like could that also count as a day if you're, quarantined at home but well enough to check in on your computer? So I think there's a lot of questions there, and I think it has to be there's some local parts, but also there needs to be some General Assembly action on that as well.
Very good point.
So I'll follow Bettina and say that to echo Mark's point and to echo her point as well, safety is paramount first, making sure that we have safe learning conditions for our educators and our students before they enter into school. So that means also for the essential support professionals who have to go in and sanitize the buildings before anybody steps into a classroom, making sure that they have the protective gear, make sure that they are being compensated professionally, not only just in general, like they should be making $15 an hour minimum, but also for putting their own health and safety at risk to make sure that other people can enter the building. I think the second thing is, which is critically important, is that no plan for reopening schools should make sure to have educators from across the spectrum on it, because we have been the ones who have been working out the problems and the kinks and seeing everything on the front line of how we've been doing this virtual learning and trying to attend to not only the academic needs of students during this time, but the social and emotional learning needs of this time as well. And so that will be my third point, is that figuring out some sort of plan and transition plan which addresses the social emotional first of students and educators as a whole as we transition back to face-to-face or some hybrid model or total virtual. But when we all come back together in learning spaces, the first thing we are going to want to do is reestablish those connections that we lost through the virtual medium that we have been doing education for, and that's like teaching our kids how to express their emotions during this time. Our teachers going through the collective withdrawal of losing that face-to-face interaction with students and our families and in their communities, and that if the academics will come, but we have to attend to the social and emotional needs first.
So what kind of things will that require? I mean, Kristin, to follow up on what Tamika's saying, if that's our first emphasis, I mean, what does that mean for you? You've been in a small local elementary school. What's that going to mean?
I was just getting ready to jump in because I've taught kindergarten for 12 of my 16 years in education, and the thing that most kindergarten teachers are thinking about right now is how do you start kindergarten, and there's a possibility of doing that from home at a computer. That doesn't actually work for kindergarten at all. A big part of kindergarten is learning how to be around other kids and how to build a learning community and what it means to be at school at all. What does school even mean? And so that's something that's on folks' mind. And in addition to that, what you were asking, Yvonne, about the social emotional piece and how do we prepare for that?
You went out.
Even kids who have every need met at home, their parents have the financial privilege to be able to meet all of their basic needs, their food, their clothing, their shelter. They have their own emotional space to help provide a nurturing environment that is helping their child build all the social emotional skills that they need to survive and to be successful in our world. Even children who are living in that kind of environment with everything that they could possibly need taken care of are struggling, right? So then you think about all the other, like 80% of families who have some piece of that missing. I shouldn't have put a number out there. I don't know if that number is accurate. But there's a large chunk of our population that does not have all of those things happening in their household. And how are those kids, you know, surviving in this moment when they're watching their parents stress about, you know, losing their job or paying bills when their hours have been cut back, or their grandparents or aunts and uncles are sick, and maybe they're even taking care of family members, or like someone had said before, working a job to help supplement their parents' loss of income if they're in high school. Some families, you know, we already knew that we have children who grow up in families that have, you know, abusive types of relationships with each other, or that are not nurturing. And we're talking about kids who are in that environment now for 2 months with no support system available to them. Not even their school counselors can really counsel them through this moment because they have no privacy. They're not even able to call them on the phone and talk to them about this, you know? And so when we're thinking about, you know, starting school, let's say everything goes well from here on out and we start school on August 17th, we have children who've been at home for 5 months who, even under the best conditions, are going to be coming to school with trauma and struggling, so like emotionally, right, with all the things that they have heard on the news, with all the things that they've heard their neighbors and their parents talking about, with all the things that they've been worrying about themselves, you know. But then we have kids who aren't living in those conditions. And so if we're talking about really providing a sound basic education for our students, that means that we have to provide a whole child nurturing learning environment, one that is going to mean that every school has the number of school counselors that children need. Not the number that we have available, the number of counselors that our children need. It means that every school is going to have full-time social workers. It means that every school is going to have a full-time school nurse. It means that every classroom is going to be prepared to not jump into learning in the first couple of weeks of school, but instead start the school year with building our community, learning how to trust each other, because our kids have to have that trusting learning environment in order to heal from all the things that are happening now. And then, you know, we also are thinking about the fact that next year, we don't know what next year looks like. We might start school and then 2 months later, we're out of it again. That's the really hard part about this, right, is that we have no idea what the future actually looks like. So what we need to be doing right now is not asking, not begging, but just saying, school cannot happen unless we have these resources for our kids because they need them. And with so many unemployed North Carolinians right now, there are jobs in the public school system, right? It doesn't have to, I know social workers, counselors have special certifications, but there are other positions that folks who are unemployed right now who have not been working in the public school system could fulfill. We could bring in all of our custodians to in-house positions, because we know that we're going to need daily cleaning and sanitizing of our schools and our buses. And it's better for kids if they have an in-house custodian who builds relationships with them, a team of in-house custodians who build relationships with them and are invested in them. It's better if we have a team of cafeteria workers who are consistently at that building, knowing those children and feeling connected to them, right? It's just better for all of our kids if we have more adults in the building. And right now we have North Carolinians who need jobs. Let's help those folks get trained up and put them in public schools in order to fulfill our kids' needs and to the needs of North Carolina. Invest in public schools, and we create jobs for the folks who need them too.
That's a great point to make about schools are job creators. They always have been. I mean, in most counties, the school system is the largest employer. But Mark, I want to tie what they were just saying here, Tamika, Bettina, and Kristin, into your talk about the Congress. So we need positions. And this money that is before us, opportunities in Congress, could this money be used for, is any of it targeted to increasing the staffing with needs that we have for nursing assistants, social workers, teacher assistants?
Absolutely, absolutely. That's exactly where this money is directed to, going straight to the school districts to meet those exact needs that Tamika and Kristin and Bettina were speaking so eloquently to, because we are going to need more positions. We might as well forget about that class size law right now, right? Let's put that away. It's going to be moot. We're going to have possibly, whatever August, 17th or 16th looks like. We know there's not going to be 30 kids in a classroom. We know there's not going to be 700 kids in a building, or 2,000, however the size of the school is. So we're going to, what would be maybe one classroom is going to be now in 3 different rooms. So we're going to need more educators, more assistants. We need and I've heard you say this many times over these past several weeks, Yvonne, every school needs a nurse to be able to help with those symptomatic checks that are going to have to take place before anybody comes into the building, or even Tamika and I were on a call earlier today, even on the bus, right? The temperature checks and making sure that folks who are symptomatic, that they need to have a place where they can go until they can get their needs met. So all of these things cost money, and we need, really, you have to have cleaning materials. It's not going to be that rag just to get the goo off of the table that we've seen many times. There has to be, disinfectant that we were talking about. Everything has to be wiped after every surface is touched. So those are all going to have to be funded, and that's going to have to come through, as we're anticipating as we said, a big revenue shortfall. So it's going to have to be Congress to step up, and this is not a time to cut corners. And it's going to have to be coming from us here, at the ground level, to make sure Democrats and Republican congressional first understand the importance that if our kids are going to succeed and make it through this, it is going to be through an investment. That's how we got through the Great Depression, remember, through those initiatives from Roosevelt and the New Deal, right? That it was a heavy investment in the common good and in services that's going to get us through this. So so we're going to have to be very vigilant that this isn't about a Democrat or Republican issue. This is a North Carolina issue, and of course a United States and global issue that's got to be addressed.
I would say that I really appreciate what Kristin also said, and y'all can comment on this, about being a little bit more creative about those adults in the class, in the school. For example, some states are using certified nurses aides, LPNs. You don't have to have a 4-year degree RN nurse. There's some states are talking about bringing in nurses aides to be on site every day for the temperature taking, isolating kids, helping with medication, with an RN resource for supervising a certain number of. So that's creative. Another group of folks are saying, well, you know what? We can bring in our retired counselors and social workers and waive their certification if they have been, in the classroom or in the system the last 5 years. We'll waive that for 1 year to bring in some retired folks, teachers, retired social workers, counselors, because they know how it will operate in a public school system. So I like Kristin's building on that. And the last thing I'll say is, Mark, where are those teacher assistants, instructional assistants? Where could we be using them at now?
Absolutely. You can be using them, obviously, in every corner of every classroom and every work area, and helping, all hands on deck. So this is a time where, as I think, y'all mentioned earlier about, there's a lot of people out of jobs right now. Well, we can have those jobs in our public schools, meeting the needs of our kids. And this is a time to really put our compassion and our money where it really works best, and that's with our kids. But we're going to need more classroom teachers too. And this is the time to make sure that we have a teacher shortage right now, right? So we're going to have to make sure that we do the best we can to make sure we get folks that want to come and to be in our field of education. So this is not the time to cut corners.
Let me ask Bettina, because you're sitting on a school board, if you got some of this money that Mark's hoping for from either the governor or the General Assembly or from Congress, would you consider using some of that money to hire for, you know, 1-year contract, hiring some of our teacher assistants back so we can make sure in the K through 3 grades we have more help with catching up for reading, more help for the social emotional learning that Kristin and Tamika were talking about? Is that something y'all were talking about as a school board?
Yeah, absolutely. I think we will, with the funding, leave no rock unturned as we consider what's the best way to spend that funding and have the greatest impact on our students. And so that is going to be with staff. We have a lot of teacher assistants who are skilled, talented at what they do. So how do we help use them to help make sure we're socially distancing in the classroom, to help bring our staff up to make sure they're able to work with our teachers and students. So I think we're open to every suggestion. We're going to have to be creative.
Well, and one of the things that I'll kind of shift slightly in the conversation to looking kind of at central office and at local schools. We've been talking at some of the bigger things. And I'm really interested in the view of how much flexibility y'all think that central offices will have. What does central office need to be doing to help people in each of those individual schools? What should we be lobbying for, if I guess, or advocating for? What's going to happen at central office in terms of policies and procedures to help our teachers when they show up and our kids when they show up to be successful? I mean, any comments on that when you think about policies and procedures and help that teachers and principals will need?
Yeah, I mean, I don't mind starting with this. Central office is there to support school building. And over the last decade, a lot of the school districts in North Carolina have cut their central office employees in order to not have cuts touch the classroom as deeply as, you know, they would have other with the impact of the General Assembly's funding levels. And I think this is a time when we're going to really see a huge negative impact on classrooms because of that. Because the role of central office employees, if we had a robust support system in our central offices around the state, would be to go into classrooms, would be to model for teachers and do some professional learning and side-by-side teaching, even, especially for our new educators who are coming out of a student teaching that was only halfway finished and entering into a classroom. That would be the role that central office should be playing. But we have a real lack of central office employees because most of our school districts have used cuts there to keep from cutting the classrooms. And so I think that central office is going to be facing a lot of these challenges as well, because they are going to want to support classrooms and teachers and students, and they are going to be very stretched to do that in the way that they know will be most effective.
Anyone else want to comment on that?
I think
sure. So okay. I'll just say just really quickly one point that is really important is that also like the flow of information and communication between school sites and central office is going to be really critical in making sure that everything works the way it's supposed to. A lot of times, you know, from the school site perspective, a lot of times people feel like they don't get heard at the central office level, or the information that comes out of the central office level is confusing. And so it's going to be really important to maintain open communication back and forth between school sites and central office in order to have one cohesive working school district where everybody's voice and perspective is valued from the school level to the central office, who is going to, like Kristin said, provide that support for this new space of delivering instruction and support for our students and our staff that's going to have to happen as we re-enter school.
Tamika, what I was going to say is that central office needs to listen to the teachers and the staff in the building. So we were right on the same page. Whatever systems are created need to be created with staff in the building at the forefront of those decisions. So.
Well, I love that, because I think that maybe it was Mark at the very beginning who said everybody's going to start putting together task force or groups or committees to talk about this, much as we're doing tonight. And I think that we are doing a good job at being, representative. We have teachers, we have school board members, we have administrators. Terrence is wearing 3 or 4 hats as a parent. I'm a grandmother. And I think it's important to have those voices in these conversations, because one of the things I'm concerned about is, are we going to get our children back? Are a lot of parents going to not want to bring their kids? I want you to think about this question if you'd like to address it. So I think that I'm wondering if how do we make parents feel safe? How can we make people feel, parents feel heard? So, Terrence, you might even answer this one yourself, too.
I can't tell if Terrence can talk or not. I was going to say real quick that one unintended consequence that, people are not talking about is that there's a reason why we don't have cleaning chemicals in our schools right now. And that's because there are a lot of, respiratory irritants that come with that. And I know that there are some parents out there that have concerns about, their child with asthma being around all of these cleaning supplies in a school as well. I don't know if that's something that, Terrence, you've heard in your parent circles as well, but that's one concern that we have too, is will students who have asthma or other respiratory illnesses, will their parents be willing to send them to school, because the things that are going to keep them safe are also going to hurt them.
Okay.
I think there's also some concern that decisions to reopen may be political and not based on science and data. And so I think it's important. We just had a conversation about having parents for Durham on our task force around reentry, because we need parents to know that we're using data and science to think about what is the right way for us to reopen schools, and having them at the beginning of the conversation builds trust versus at the end in August saying, oh, we did all these things, come back, right? So how do we keep parents in the loop of those conversations all the way through?
Well, and and now I want to turn to kind of like be thinking about this other group that's really important to us. We've been talking about it a little bit through the conversation. This is one of Terrence's questions. His sound's not working, y'all, so we're not ignoring Terrence. So he and I are texting. We're having sound issues, but we've been talking about things to do, but what are some of the things that our elected leaders need to be doing right now? What do school boards need to be doing? Okay, we're going to pick on Bettina a little bit, and county commissioners are part of the funding too, right? And policies and decisions. And what about our North Carolina legislators? What are some things that we need to see in place so that when school can open safely and in a way that parents feel, that they can send their kids to school? What are some things that y'all been thinking about that our elected officials ought to really be doing to help us get back to a safe and effective opening?
So I'll say it's really important that because educators and parents in our communities have been uplifting sort of our concerns and our voices around making sure that we continue to be safe and we move responsibly and we listen to the science and the data from the medical professionals. But this is where, if we have truly responsive elected leaders, this is where all of those concerns and those voices meet actual policy decisions and votes and legislative decisions that are going to matter. And if we don't have elected officials from our school boards, who are General Assembly representatives, who are willing to listen to their constituents and put forward the needs of all North Carolinians with respect to our youngest citizens being paramount in how we decide to reopen schools, then it is us as the voting constituents that need to make sure that we have people that do that. So it is extremely important for them to listen, but also to follow through with action that is responsible to the constituents and to the citizens of North Carolina.
Well, what about some of the policies that I know? What about calendar control, class size? the reading program that we've been seeing a lot in the news. I mean, how can these things, how can legislators step up, or even school board members who make policy and commissioners who fund it, how do we get their attention, and what are the most important things they should be doing right now in terms policy-wise to, you know, we've talked about money and how we could use money, but what about these policies that are, you know, impeding some of the things we need to do?
Yvonne, I was like getting ready to jump in about that because there are two things that are on the lips of every Wake County educator right now. One is what were all of our General Assembly folks thinking when they said we had to add 5 days into our instructional calendar for students remote learning, because they are not compensating teachers for those days. No one talked to educators about that idea. Education doesn't work like, it's not transactional the way that, you know, other things might be. So kids miss time this year, putting 5 other days in next year's schedule with different teachers, different content, different, you know, standards, everything, that doesn't make up for what they missed this year. And then you're also not compensating teachers. So what I was going to say is right now, all 3 of these levels of elected officials, elected decision makers, the very most important thing that they need to be doing right now is talking to their local NCAE affiliate and having, you know, roundtables, town hall conversations with them. They need to be, before they vote on anything, they need to be meeting with not just one teacher and saying, I talked to this teacher and this is what they said, right? But they need to be having conversations with their whole local affiliate and getting an idea of how does this decision affect custodians? How does this decision affect bus drivers or safety assistants, a teacher assistant, a kindergarten teacher versus a 9th grade teacher? You know, like legislators and school board members and commissioners are oftentimes not educators. And so of course we don't expect them to know what we want to happen without talking to us. So right now, the most important thing for them to be doing is to be reaching out to their local NCAE groups because, and I'll tell you why, local NCAE affiliates are more important than just random educators, because we have networks that can bring together educators very quickly, and we have networks that include all public school workers instead of just one piece, right? And so that partnership right now is going to be very important, especially if they want to be reelected.
Yeah, I would just echo everything that this great panel has been saying about that. I mean, I think when, you know, everyone here would probably say we support local control and, you know, and making sure that one size doesn't fit all. But during a time of a pandemic and crisis, what we saw happen when that local control was going was when we didn't have guidance coming from the state level, we had a lot of implementation of some things that didn't really benefit the needs of our students when they were rolled out, particularly as we were doing virtual learning, remote distance, food distribution, and we were just getting concerns of how things were being done so randomly across the state. And we were heard from our local leaders, like Tamika and Kristin, that were saying, this is when it's implemented, this is not what's best for kids. And, you know, we directly went straight to the state board and our legislators. I was like, we got to have some direct guidance, and we need to follow the Department of Public Health guidance and the CDC. That should have been basic, and we weren't doing that. So it was, you know, parents, communities, and NCAE members rising up and insisting that these non-negotiables be implemented, and it's going to have to be the same way as we get towards reentry, whatever that looks like. That they've got to listen to the experts, and as Kristin and Tamika were saying, and that is the local NCAE, because of the relationships and connections they have with Bettina and these great state school board members that they work so closely with, and the county commission. I mean, we're going to be looking for county funding as well. There's every school district now is going to their county commissions, right? That are broke because of a General Assembly that has not funded our schools, and it's had to be put on the back of the local counties. So, and now we've had this rainy day fund that they've been holding, and we have we have a monsoon that's hit us, and now we don't know what tomorrow is going to bring because we have so underfunded and starved our schools over the past 2 years. We've got to rise up right now and move forward with lessons learned.
So we've talked about the calendar, returning local control of the calendar. We can see even now in the middle of this event we're in, the pandemic. I have to be careful because I always call it the pandemic. I'm sorry, everybody who's listening. And I've said that so many times that I don't know how to say pandemic anymore, so I apologize. But one of the things that we see is even now, we're just getting just the 2 weeks early start and not a lot of flexibility around the summer and in August with what we might want to do. It might really work best for us to do August 1 and stagger alternate days in August, right? There's a whole bunch of stuff that I still don't see that you guys are getting any local control. And Bettina, how about flexibility with how you spend your money? Hasn't that been an issue with the school boards have had with this General Assembly over the last few years? And what kind of flexibility would really help you now as a school board member?
A lot of flexibility would really help us. I think, especially when you think about the calendar and the size of schools, like we're going to need calendar flexibility in order to stagger those entrances. We can't have the traditional high schools meeting in the way that they were before, because and here we have some schools that have 2,000 students, so that's not possible, right? I think all the money that we have that has been earmarked, or either we have funds that have also been capped. So when we think about caps around our funding around students with exceptionality, students who are learning English as a second language, like we know that those needs are going to need to look different, and so we need funding and flexibility that's going to make sure we cover those. We know that as we're going into a recession, and more of our students, hopefully not, but we may, and our students and families are dealing with unemployment, we need conditional funding that's going to be able to help support schools and supporting those students. So I think there's flexibility in funding, and these kind of arbitrary gaps that have been placed by the General Assembly also need to be lifted so that districts can get what they need.
And that's really helpful. And Terrence, have you got your any sound back yet? I don't think so. Go ahead, Tamika. Yes, Kristin.
Do you mind if I add something? I'm sorry. When Bettina was talking, it reminded me that, I know this is a Wake County problem and it's not statewide, but we have multi-track year-round schools, and it's a significant portion of our system. And without the local flexibility around either instructional hours or instructional days, that really binds our school system into starting right after July 4th, which we may not be ready to start then. And if we don't start then, how do those children who are in multi-track year-round schools make up that instruction? Are they starting kindergarten, 9th grade, 6th grade from remote learning, or even just in a new classroom, even if it's not a major transitional year, a new classroom environment from home? And so the General Assembly does have the power. They don't have the power to say that we shouldn't have multi-track year-round, but they do have the power to provide flexibility around instructional hours and instructional days, particularly in an emergency situation like this.
And when you're talking about that, all of you made me think of something else too, which is, what kind of flexibility do you have? And is this the time to start a universal, school nutrition program where breakfast and lunch is available for any student who wants it? We've always thought that that might be a better way for kids to feel good about eating at school. But what about now? Is any of this money that you're seeing, either local money or state or federal money, can we and should we be directing some of this? And do we have the flexibility to direct this to maybe for once and for all put in place a universal school nutrition program where any child who wants to eat breakfast or lunch can do so?
So I wanted to jump in really quickly, and I'll get to that point in 1 second, but I just wanted to add to talking about the calendar flexibility, how extremely important it is, and particularly in this side of the state of North Carolina, with it being hurricane season. coming up right in the summer, and how, especially like in places like Robeson County, where they lost a multitude of school days because of hurricanes, and having that flexibility to start as early as possible will allow us the opportunity to make sure that our kids and our schools can plan for instruction when we lose like maybe 2 weeks in the middle of September, October due to hurricanes. And so I just wanted to put that there. It's really important. About providing food for students universally across the board, you know, in our educator circles, I've seen lots of teachers post, you know, we're feeding every child that comes through that drive-through feeding line, right? But why couldn't we do it all year long? Right. And so it's really important to know that we need to use a combination of federal and statewide funds to make sure that every kid can eat. We know that lots of students come to school and we are feeding them breakfast and lunch and sending them home with food on the weekends through partnerships with local community groups so that they can eat. And so we should be able to provide every student the access to eat at no cost. Because it is a part, we know that it is a substantial part of schools and students being attentive and ready to learn in schools. It takes away that distraction of kids having to worry about, you know, if I'm hungry, I can't concentrate. Like, so we should be advocating for full federal funding to make sure that every kid can eat, but also in partnerships with our state government to make sure that every kid can eat in school and has the opportunity to do so.
Anybody want to add to that? I mean, she did a great job on answering that. But, you know, I've often wondered, and I've never been able to get my hands on these figures. And I wonder maybe Bettina, being in a school board situation, has. But I often wonder that the money we spend administering to determine who can get free or reduced lunch, and all the staffing we do around the forms and the paperwork and the proof, and then managing it, and then worrying about collecting the money, I think, mercy. I bet it would be a wash if we would simply say, you know, check here if you want to eat lunch or breakfast at school, and you know, you have to sign up once a month so we know how much food to fix. Other than that, you're good. I can't imagine that we would be any worse off. But anyway, so I'm thinking about the things that we can mark. I'm thinking about that money we're pushing for and how we can really talk about fixing some of these things. And I wonder, for one last comment, since you guys are on there, you're in the front lines, and Terrence has a kindergarten student right now. What about universal pre-K? I mean, what role is that going to play this summer and this fall and next year, and stuff that's going on? What do you think?
Critical. I mean, you know, obviously we've always said that's, you know, when you look at trying to throw this type of paper performance at third grade level and get kids on, you know, pass the test at third grade. And, you know, we've always said that was just, you know, throwing money to the wind by trying to test kids that come into a reading grade level, you know, with a vocabulary, 2-to-1 vocabulary deficit from poverty to kids in a middle class SES. It's all about early intervention. These educators here will tell you about that. That's a key piece of making sure that every child has equitable access to high quality early childhood education. And you know, we've been beating that drum for a number of years before this pandemic, but obviously now, when our most impacted communities are communities of color, poor communities, rural communities, are going to be hit extremely hard. And how are we going to make up for the loss of learning, but how are we also going to get this early intervention to those kids who need such a helping hand forward?
Well, and I don't want to cheat some, saving a little bit of time for our guests, but who are listening in. But there's just two other issues I want to make sure that we get kind of a consensus on, or some kind of comment on. And one is access to health care. You know, I know that you are all sitting in policy positions, leadership positions, educators. But what do you know, how are you looking at this other than having school nurses? So what happens if you have a school nurse or a nurse's aide and a child is sick and the parents have no health insurance? What are we going to do? So, where does expanding Medicaid or making healthcare accessible, what kind of federal money can we use for that? Or, what happens next if we have a child or an educator who is sick but has no access to healthcare?
Yeah. Medicaid expansion, we've been a strong advocate for that. We wanted to see it in this this go round of legislation. It didn't happen, but we have about 500,000 people that don't have access to healthcare, and I don't know the thousands that have died because we've denied them that right.
I don't know if there's ever been, we've been talking about for years how much our lives are interconnected and how the health of one affects the health of all. And I don't know of any other time that has made that so blatantly clear. Like, anybody who's in North Carolina who doesn't understand that at this moment, as we've all just experienced 2 months of being shut down, having our state shut down because of a health crisis, this is the moment where we all should be very invested in understanding that every single person in North Carolina, in the United States, in the world, deserves access to healthcare. That's a human right. And if our neighbor does not have access to healthcare, if our students don't have access to healthcare, that impairs our ability to live in a healthy community. So even if they're coming from a selfish point of view, the selfish thing to do is to expand Medicaid so that you make sure you're exposed to less illness and that you will always have access to healthcare, right? That would be the selfish thing to do. And so this is the moment where, like, no matter what your income level is, no matter what your stance has been in the past on Medicaid, it's not only like more fiscally responsible, but it's also, very clear that our society cannot exist with a COVID-19 or any other pandemic that may come later. We cannot survive these crises without every single person in our community having access to high quality preventative care and responsive health care.
So you mean if you're healthy, I might be healthy too? Yeah. So finally, we've been saying, Kristin, you're exactly right. For some people from science-based reasons, some people for moral, spiritual reasons, and some people for common sense reasons, have been saying for a long time that there are reasons that we want people to have access to mental health, because people who are who have problems with mental health spill over and impact all of our community in negative ways. So now with physical health, it's the same thing. If you're healthy, Mark's healthy, I run into you on the street or in the grocery store or in a classroom, I'm going to be healthy. So that's really good. So here's the last thing, and then we're going to switch to questions. We've been talking a lot about the beginning of the conversation about the whole issue around internet, high-speed, reliable internet, broadband, whatever term you want to use, devices. Are we to the point now that we need to have a new expectation for what our children and families, our teachers should have access to? And how do you propose would be a good way to do that? And how do we get school boards and commissioners, that local money, like Mark said, we're going to have some local money here. We got to have some partners with businesses, legislators. What are your thoughts about how we can improve? We've had our troubles tonight, with internet connectivity ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
What are you thinking there in terms of what would be good policy for us to have around internet and devices?
So I'm gonna totally take this one from an instructional technology point of view. I think internet should be a public utility. It should be a public good. We have seen, and these are not new issues. So I would just say this: we have seen the issue of the digital divide between urban and rural districts. We know that there are educators and students and their families who are currently sitting in the middle of the digital divide because they have devices. They might have a laptop, they have a computer, they have a cell phone, they have a tablet, but they are just outside of the service area of the internet service provider. So like literally we have a teacher, one of our teacher colleagues inside of NCAE, who in order to get a Wi-Fi signal with his hotspot from his cell phone, he has to sit on top of the trunk of his car so that he can connect to the internet, because the company won't build lines out to his house. So like it's those things there, like having everybody pays into taxes for water, we pay in for, so for sewer, electricity, we should be paying a public utility for internet access. And that has to come at a combination between the federal level and that has to come from the state level. We know that locals can work, local governments and local school boards and county commissioners can work with businesses to provide the devices and things to get onto the internet, speedway to highway, whatever you call it. But the infrastructure that is going to hold and support broadband access comes from the federal and state government.
Well, I don't know if anybody can answer that much better, but anybody want to try to add in? I think you're going to win that question, Tamika. And I will venture a small add in to say that I've heard I work with a lot of international students. And one of the things that they always say to me when they come to America is that our internet is crappier and way too expensive. They're used to coming from a place, Tamika, where it is a utility. It is just like water, lights, etc., and where it is easily accessible everywhere and it's cheap. And so when they come here, they're shocked at the internet service bills we have, hundreds of dollars. So I think a lot of the students come from countries and they agree with you. It should be a utility. And the other thing is, just like we know now, it's not just enough to be able to get on your phone and the internet. What we need for instructions and with our children is high speed, reliable, so that their devices, their software works. And here's my last comment on this. So we get back, let's say that we get back to school and we're able to get back to school and we get to some sense of normal over the next year or so. Some folks have said, well, that we don't need to keep providing these services. But don't you feel like kids are left out when they can't communicate check their homework, Kristin? And, I look at my grandsons, they go on the internet before this happened and check what homework they forgot. Their teachers email their parents. So haven't we already been having some real issues of equity around this?
I mean, you think about how much we use the internet for everything that we do, right? Small businesses use the internet for us to pay on their square, right? Like that's such an integral part of all these little things that we take for granted because we have access to it. And our students who don't have Wi-Fi at their house are missing out on all of these different pieces. And to your point, Yvonne, a phone is not enough. A lot of the programs and skills that children have to build on a computer are not accessible on a phone in the same way. Even just reading text, right? Like I, as a reading teacher and a kindergarten teacher, I kind of cringe a little bit when people are reading books on tablets because I'm like, there's this thing that happens in your brain when you're turning pages and it makes those connections and it helps you, build the muscles that your brain up the way it needs to be reading longer and more complex text later on. But if
you
all you have is a tablet,
tiny screen isn't helping?
That's right. If all you have is a tablet, a phone still is not good enough to read a text on, right? Especially for a beginning reader or for a student who is, maybe in high school but reading really complex text. But aside from that, just the fact that, let's say students have devices that are appropriate for the work they're doing and they have some sort of internet. If there's more than one person in their house trying to use it, it may not be accessible either, and that's some of the things that has come up a lot during this remote learning is if a parent's at home trying to telework and there's a child trying to do a Google Classroom Meet with their classroom, oftentimes someone is having to log off of what they're doing so that the other one can be productive. And that's not even like addressing the fact that there are a lot of families out there that have multiple children who are trying to share one device. And maybe their parent is also trying to do their work on that one device. And so everyone is scheduling their learning and work around this one piece. And that's not how it should be. If everyone needs the internet and devices in that capacity, then it should be, as Tamika said, a public utility.
Okay, so let's go ahead and take some questions from our audience now. Let's see if I can check here in our chat room and see. If you have a question, you please type it in the chat room there. One of the questions that someone has brought up earlier, which I think you kind of already addressed, was they're very concerned about young children using technology, and they wanted to kind of have you speak a little bit about, is this, what we should try to keep in mind about very young children using technology. Any comments on that?
Yeah, so I will say that the virtual learning environment that we are currently participating in right now goes against every recommendation about limiting screen time for young children. And so it's really important that we listen. That's why it's really important for us to have a lot of educators, right, in planning how remote learning looks for schools, particularly in our elementary and pre-K early childhood grades, because there has to be a balance between making sure that we are not giving our students too much screen time, which is going to really do some damage to like their brain development and really vision and all those things like that, and balancing that with real life experiences and hands-on learning that a lot of parents are already doing with their kids, because we are not in the physical school building. We see a lot of parents now working with their children, and they are, doing nature walks outside, and they're doing lots of physical activity, and parents are trading hands-on activities with science and music and art and things like that. And so we not only have to balance that with our younger kids, but then we also have to figure out how we're going to bring those non-traditional learning experiences and knowledge that our students have gained with their parents during this time and fold that into when they come back to school buildings in the fall. How are we going to be able to do that? Because, authentic learning takes place everywhere, and it doesn't just show up on a tested assessment. So how are we going to make sure that all of that learning, we make sure that all of that learning is valuable for our students?
And to add on to what you're saying, Tamika, one of the things that we've been talking a lot about, you've been part of some of these conversations, is that remote learning doesn't mean learning on a computer. It's meaning that right now because nobody was prepared for this to happen, right? But going forward in the future, we need to be planning for remote learning to not be learning on a screen, but instead, some of this funding that's coming from the federal government, in the state COVID bills that's dedicated to remote learning. I think it's something, there's multiple $1 million that they've dedicated to K-12 remote learning. Why are we not going to use that money to put books in our kids' hands, or like magazine subscriptions for our children, National Geographic Kids, or something like that? There are other things that we can be buying with that money to support remote learning that is not a device necessarily, or not an online learning program. And this is where educators really thrive. Like Tamika was saying, we could give lots of ideas around how to, enrich science standards, social studies standards, reading, math, all of our content areas, beyond just doing an online program or an online lesson. And so if we give educators space to be creative and to plan and preparation, and funding for the resources that our kids need to have at their house to do that, we can make that happen.
Okay. So another question that someone says is how, is this, they're concerned about the funding. How are we going to get the funding for this? Are there some ways that we can save money in some areas to spend it in others? Someone has said in here, then why are we spending money on vouchers? There's a new voucher bill to give more money to vouchers. So just talk a little bit about that. Mark, you have a lot of experience in this.
Yes, I was going to say what we really need to watch out for is the profiteers and the privatizers to try to come in and take advantage of this moment. And we're already seeing some of the, the big corporations and groups already trying to pander to this rethinking what public education is going to look like. And I think just the comments that we just heard, Tamika and Kristin and Bettina saying as well, is that we know that nothing replaces the face-to-face in-person instruction. We know that too much FaceTime is not good. I hear that from colleagues all the time that say they've actually pulled their kids away from the videos and the on-platform lessons because it's just not good. The kids are not engaged and they're doing exactly the experiential learning. And that also, what if we had those textbooks that we had, all the funding that we've been begging for years, if they had them at home right now? But there is a move to privatize, to do more online learning as public education, and to now broaden, expand vouchers in North Carolina and take more public dollars and throwing it into that dark hole that's unaccountable. When we know, we believe, and that it is unconstitutional. We just saw it in Tennessee this week from the lower courts that have ruled it unconstitutional and a voucher bill. So we hope to get to that point here in North Carolina that we know the best option is always a strong public school system, but we have to really be on the watch out for those the privateers who are going to try to seize this moment of online learning as a new option of rethinking what public education is going to look like. And that's just not so. We know that the best way is to get our kids back in school when it's safe and healthy. But in the meantime, they're making sure they're taken care of while we're doing distance learning appropriately.
Okay, well, I have another question here. It says, what can we do to address the lack of information being shared from officials regarding multi-track year-round calendar, as well as the implication for 10-day head counts on our staffing allotments? Because they think there's going to be a lot of parents who are going to keep their kids home, at least for the next couple of months or maybe the fall semester. So they're saying, what about if parents keep their kids home until the traditional calendar begins in August? What's going to happen? Kristin, you have a lot of experience with the year-round program, being Wake County president and a teacher here. You want to take a shot at that? What can we do?
Yeah, year-round schools are always they oftentimes kind of suffer because of the 10-day head count. Because there are, if a new family moves to the area, they may not know that year-round school even exists. So when they go to register their child, they're coming in after the 10-day head count. And that affects, for folks who may be listening right now who don't know about the 10-day head count, that is one of the metrics that the state uses to decide how much funding each school gets for their staffing. So this is a really big question beyond just the year-round schools, actually, because in August there may be families who, if the General Assembly has not provided the things that they believe their children need in order to be successful in school, may not feel safe sending their child to school, and that means that we could face an issue where the funding that schools get to staff their buildings is significantly less than what they need a month or two later. So I think in this case that the year-round thing is actually like separate, because multi-track was really just for our Wake County School Board, but the 10-day head count as a bigger issue, the General Assembly really should be talking about doing away with the 10-day head count for right now. Maybe there's like a rolling average that happens instead, where if the count goes up 2 months in the school, they're going to have to give us more money to provide another teacher
there's got to be some flexibility afforded to school boards and school districts, because otherwise we're going to end up with severely overcrowded classrooms, which is the exact opposite of what we need happening this year.
Okay, so a couple of questions are coming in here, and they're kind of related to this topic. So I'm going to go to this, which is our last slide of thoughts, is the question around, I'm sorry, I'm hopping around here because my internet's acting crazy too. But the whole questions that are coming in is like, what are parents supposed to be doing right now? What can parents do to help when schools open? So, you know me, I am a parent, grandparent advocate. So what what can we be telling parents and guardians to do in terms of advocacy, in terms of information? They're feeling pretty helpless right now.
I think hearing from parents is always great. So please email your local elected officials. So that starts with your school board, your county commissioners. But our advocacy around what public schools needs can't stop. I think it's tempting to kind of rest right now, but moves are being made constantly in the General Assembly as they are coming back into session, and they need to have parents' voices in their inboxes, you know, our voices as well, but they need to know that parents are watching and paying attention. I think recognizing again that public schools are bedrocks of communities. So when they fail, our communities are going to fail. And that is, I mean, when we talk about these issues, they're all interconnected with housing, with healthcare, with our schools, like everything is connected. So parents, please continue to advocate, email and talk to other parents and get in the inboxes of your elected officials because they need to hear from you.
Anyone want to add to that? I mean, I think Mark actually kicked off this evening saying there's some things coming up soon to Congress. We know the General Assembly is coming back on May 18th in North Carolina. They're not done. I mean, they made a relief bill, but there's still lots of policies and issues up in the air, as we've been talking about tonight. So it sounds to me that Bettina, they need to find out who their school board members are. They need to find out who their county commissioners are. They need to find out who their leaders are in the NCAE and other advocacy groups, and they need to start sharing and speaking up because they have an important voice in this, right? It's their kids. You know, that we're talking about. So that's really good. So I'm gonna let you guys now, because we're gonna have to wrap it up. But I want to give each of you just a minute to go around in closing and share some of your thoughts about this whole issue to our audience, and to, you know, we are recording this, and so we'll post this later for other folks who missed us tonight. So what are your closing thoughts on this whole issue around reopening our schools?
I'll go ahead and go, but I just think it's really important for us to know that our voices as educators and parents of public school children are essential to any discussion about reopening schools. Because with our parents and educators, that is a unique and thriving partnership that exists in the traditional face-to-face four-wall school building and has continued to exist through this virtual learning as we are trying to navigate this global pandemic together. And so any version of reopening schools does not have that partnership at the center of it that holds down the needs of our students and our educators, is not going to be one that is going to be effective and not one that's going to resonate well within those two communities. And so reopening schools is essential to, you know, reviving our economy, not only for the lives of our students and our families and the communities that surround the school, but as our whole state. And once we anchor those things, if we plan for the success of public schools in our communities, then we're planning for the success of North Carolina, and that is paramount in making sure that we do it safely and we do it responsibly and we center those voices.
Bettina, I'll pick on you next, or Kristin, one of you. Yeah.
was watching Bettina to see if she was going to. I don't mind going next. So, yeah, piggybacking on what Tamika just said, we talk a lot about the power of parents and educators united. In North Carolina, we have some bit over 100,000 educators in the state of North Carolina working in the public school system. We teach 1.5 million students, and each of those students has at least one adult connected to them who votes, who has the ability to write letters or make phone calls to legislators, school board members, county commissioners, particularly county commissioners and General Assembly members, since they have funding, power. To ease up on you a little there, Bettina. but the power of those two groups coming together, there is nothing that we cannot win for our kids and for our schools if those two groups decide that we need it, right? So parents, right now, if you're a parent, this is the time to dream with the educators you're connected with, right? What is it that your kid needs? This is the time to say it, right? If our schools don't have the things our kids need in them, and educators and parents are not willing to go and return to those schools, then school doesn't happen, right? The General Assembly is a body of 170 adults from North Carolina. We are in the millions, and we, as parents, as educators, these two groups know what's best for our students. We have the most invested interest in making sure that they're successful and healthy, but also the rest of the community should, at this point, after 2 months of being, cooped up in their house, and seeing if they don't have their own children, seeing the struggles of their neighbors and their other family members, they should understand that the health of our community, our entire state, is dependent on a thriving, robust, well-funded, fully funded public school system. And so this is the year that needs to happen. And if the General Assembly is not willing to make it happen, parents and educators, we do have a voice in that, and we do have power and control over whether or not that happens. And so we need to start recognizing that we are not helpless, we're not weak, and we don't need anybody to come and save us. We actually already possess all the power that we need to make this happen for our kids if we just decide to act together on it.
Okay, Bettina, that's hard to follow.
I was going to say, I don't know what to say that hasn't already been said. You all said that so eloquently. I mean, the ballot box will be open in November. It's important to vote. And I think, this is going to be hard. It's going to be challenging figuring out how to reopen schools. And so I really ask that parents and teachers and educators, we have to be in this together. We have to be talking together this whole time. We have to be sharing ideas and disagreeing and agreeing and figuring it out. So I think I agree with everything that has been said before me, and also let's work together during this time in order for us to be able to get the schools that our students deserve.
Mark, as fitting, we'll let you have the last word.
Yes.
As our leader for the last 8 years.
I have, let me tell you, I'm the smallest part of all of us. And I couldn't do it without the partnership of our great NCAE local leaders, our great elected officials from the local to the state level and the national levels, and the great partners like you, Yvonne, and Public School First, because that is the heartbeat of North Carolina. I do want to tell you and close out to tell you that we have a national call of action a week from today on May the 14th at NEA.org/action town hall. We are mobilizing across the country with Week of Actions virtually, Red for Ed actions, Facebook Lives, and I want you to text action to 84693. Text the word action, all caps, to 84693 for the latest updates at the federal level. I keep on saying 175 billion is a minimum of what we will need to get to the states to make sure these resources for our students and our educators and our parents and communities are provided to get us through this crisis. And with that, I close. And it has been an honor to partner with Public Schools First these past 8 years. Love you, Yvonne.
really smart women you've got here, on your panel.
I tell you, it's just they're amazing. They're amazing.
Well,
Love y'all.
while we've been closing up, I've put up this slide that says when public schools reopen. And so we've been using this hashtag when public schools reopen. And there's a Facebook group, I think, called this group. But we really, I want you to go to our website and look up publicschoolfirstnc.org, resources, fact sheets, and look at this, what we put together. Much of it's what was talked about tonight. And we really are trying to start a dialogue with all of you in the community that was just named by Kristin. All your parents, guardians, grandparents, business leaders, education leaders, educators. We're trying to start a conversation around how to open our schools safely and effectively. Everything from how we feed kids, interact with kids, provide social emotional learning, get teachers ready to understand trauma and to be able to respond and identify trauma and deal with it effectively. Everything from, how do we make sure that our schools are clean, and how do we make sure that we have the internet and the devices we need. So we're really trying to think ahead, and I really want you to please go to that website. And then the last thing I'll show, another slide, is one of the things that all of you on this call have worked with me on over the last years. We have a partnership in Wake County, Kristin and I have, is to talk about the whole issues around adverse childhood experiences. So I can't let the evening end without talking about that we already had significant issues for many of our children in our school system around adverse childhood experiences and issues around trauma. And we have built a really great website here. There's some really wonderful resources. And we know that when our children come back, that we're going to have a situation where we are going to have even more children at all levels for all different walks of life who are going to be experiencing the impact of COVID-19. And so I do hope you'll go to this website. If you know, all you listeners and participators tonight, if you have resources that we haven't put on this page, please send them to us. We'll be happy to add them in. Anything that's on our website at Public Schools First NC, you own it. I'm giving you the copyright. So if there's stuff there that you can download, copy, cut and paste, and use in any way that you can, we pull that together for you so that it's a resource for you. Now we had this wonderful kickoff panel tonight, but I want you to come back if you can share with all the folks who weren't lucky enough to be here tonight. We're going to do this every Thursday night for a month. Next week we have joining us would be Brian Prophet, who is the Vice President-elect coming in to serve with Tamika. We have school board members from Winston-Salem joining us next week. And we will, so I hope that you will join us next week. And we have Donald Dunn next week, who is with the National PTA. So we're going to have really important folks who are taking leadership roles right now to help us with public schools and on these conversations and get more and a broader input into ways that we can solve this. We'll have other school board members and other folks from NCAE because they are leading educators across the state in these issues. So if you didn't get to if your friends didn't get on here tonight, tell them they can come back next week and we'll see how that panel does. The last thing, as always, friends, all these ways we're talking about to our audience tonight, everything that we're doing means that we got to figure out a way to stay connected. We invite you to go to our website and get our information, go to Facebook and like us, Twitter and follow us, because we're going to be sharing out important information from the national level, NEA, NCAE, NCPTA, National PTA, Public Schools Forum, all these organizations that are here to lift up our children and our educators. We're going to be sharing that information. So let's get connected and let's advocate and work together, because this is our time to make sure that we come out and we are bold with what we're doing. Now's the time to craft and to implement the bold and a comprehensive plan to ensure that when our schools open, they open well, they educate our children well, and they enable all our teachers and educators to stay well. Okay? So thank you for joining us tonight. Thank you to my panelists. I really appreciate it. And I look forward to working with you over this year and many other years. We're trying to do our heart. And thank you. And to our audience tonight, it was an honor to have you share this conversation with us. So good night. And thank you all very much. Bye-bye.